My water broke at 3 a.m., but instead of rushing me to the hospital, my husband packed my bags and said, "Get out, Sarah's moving in." Little did he know I was about to inherit more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes, and his pregnant girlfriend was about to become my employee. The sharp pain hit me like lightning, radiating from my lower back and wrapping around my swollen belly like a vice. I gasped, gripping the bathroom doorframe as warm liquid trickled down my legs. After 9 months of waiting, it was finally happening. My baby was coming. "David!" I called out, my voice shaky with excitement and fear. "David, it's time. The baby's coming." I heard his footsteps, but they weren't hurried. They weren't the panicked, loving rush of a soon-to-be father. They were measured, deliberate, almost annoyed. When he appeared in the hallway, his face wasn't filled with joy or concern. It was cold, calculating, like he was solving a particularly irritating problem. "Perfect timing," he muttered, running his hand through his disheveled hair. "Just perfect." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and I doubled over, breathing heavily. "David, we need to go to the hospital." "No. The contractions are getting closer." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not love, not concern, not even basic human compassion. It was something closer to disgust, mixed with what I can only describe as relief. "Actually, Emma," he said, his voice eerily calm, "there's something we need to discuss first." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you insane? I'm in labor. Whatever it is can wait until after our baby is born." "No, it can't." He walked past me into our bedroom and pulled out a large suitcase from under the bed. "My suitcase. Because it's not going to be our baby. It's going to be your baby." The room started spinning. Between the physical pain of contractions and the emotional gut punch of his words, I felt like I might collapse. "What are you talking about?" David began throwing my clothes into the suitcase with mechanical efficiency. Underwear, sweaters, my favorite dress. Everything tossed in without care, like he was disposing of garbage. "Sarah's pregnant too. Did you know that? 6 months along. And unlike some people, she didn't spend the last 9 months eating everything in sight and complaining about swollen feet." His secretary. The 24-year-old blonde who always lingered a little too long at his desk, who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, who wore skirts a little too short for a professional office. The woman I'd convinced myself was just being friendly when she'd touch his arm or lean over his shoulder to look at documents. "You're having an affair." It wasn't a question. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "I'm upgrading," he said matter-of-factly, moving to the dresser to grab my jewelry box. "Sarah's young, ambitious, grateful. She doesn't spend her days watching soap operas and complaining about how hard pregnancy is. She has plans, goals, a future that doesn't involve turning into a frumpy housewife." Another contraction ripped through me and I had to steady myself against the wall. Through gritted teeth I managed to ask, "How long?" "How long what?" "How long have you been sleeping with her?" David paused in his packing, considering his answer like he was deciding what to order for lunch. "Since about 3 months into your pregnancy. You got so needy. Emotional." Sarah was there, understanding, supportive. She didn't make me feel guilty for working late or wanting to grab drinks with colleagues. The betrayal hit me harder than any contraction. While I'd been growing our child, worrying about doing everything right, taking prenatal vitamins, giving up wine, reading parenting books, he'd been creating an entirely different life with someone else. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered, the reality of my situation beginning to sink in. "I'm about to give birth. That's not my problem anymore." He zipped up the suitcase and set it by the door. "Sarah's moving in tonight. We're going to be a real family, not this." He gestured vaguely at me, whatever this turned into. I felt something shift inside me, and it wasn't just another contraction. It was something harder, colder, more determined than I'd ever felt before. "You're throwing me out while I'm in labor." "I'm giving you freedom," he said with a twisted smile. "You always said you wanted to be independent, make your own decisions. Well, here's your chance." The doorbell rang and David's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That'll be Sarah. She's so excited to finally move in properly. She's been practically living out of a suitcase for weeks." As he headed downstairs, another wave of pain crashed over me, but this time I rode it with gritted teeth and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I could hear them downstairs, David's voice warm and loving in a way he hadn't spoken to me in years, and Sarah's high, delighted laughter. I grabbed my phone and called a taxi, then sat on the edge of the bed that had been ours for 5 years, waiting for my ride to the hospital. Alone. With nothing but a hastily packed suitcase and a baby who was apparently in as much of a hurry to escape this house as I was. But as I sat there listening to David help his pregnant mistress move into my home, something my grandmother used to say echoed in my mind. Emma, darling, never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. Sometimes the quietest people hold the most surprises. I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror as another contraction gripped me. You sure you don't want me to call someone, miss? Family? Friends? I shook my head, focused on my breathing. Who would I call? My parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago. My sister lived in Australia with her new husband. My few friends had slowly disappeared over the years as David systematically convinced me they were jealous of our perfect marriage, or too dramatic for our peaceful life. Just the hospital, please. 8 hours later I held my daughter for the first time. Lily Rose, 7 pounds 2 ounces of pure perfection. She had David's dark hair but my green eyes, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Unconditional love. The nurses were kind but professional, clearly wondering where the father was. I made up stories about him being deployed overseas, trapped at work, anything to avoid the pitying looks that came with the truth. When they asked about insurance, I handed over my card and prayed David hadn't already canceled me. He had. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but your insurance was terminated yesterday, the billing clerk said, her voice sympathetic but firm. The full amount for delivery and your 2-day stay will be $18,000. I stared at the bill, my stomach dropping. $18,000 I didn't have. David had controlled all our finances, giving me a small allowance for groceries and household expenses. I had maybe $300 in my personal checking account. Is their payment plan available? I asked, bouncing Lily gently as she began to fuss. Of course, but we'll need a down payment of at least 30%. $5,000. I might as well have asked for the moon. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Patterson? This is Margaret Whitfield from Whitfield, Stern and Associates. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks regarding your great-aunt Cordelia's estate. I frowned. I think you have the wrong person. I don't have a great-aunt Cordelia. Cordelia Hartwell? Your grandmother Dorothy's sister? She passed away 6 months ago and left explicit instructions that you were to be contacted after any major life event, marriage, divorce, or the birth of a child. My grandmother Dorothy. I had vague memories of her stories about a sister who'd gone off to make something of herself in the big city, but I'd always assumed they'd lost touch. I'm afraid there's been a mistake, I said, adjusting my hospital gown with one hand while holding Lily with the other. My grandmother never mentioned leaving me anything. Mrs. Patterson, I understand this is confusing, but I have all the documentation here. Could you possibly come to our office this week? There are some significant matters to discuss. Significant matters. Right now, my most significant matter was figuring out how to pay for this hospital bill and find a place to live that wasn't a shelter. I just had a baby yesterday and my situation is complicated right now. Congratulations on your daughter, Margaret said warmly. And I understand about complicated situations. That's actually why your great-aunt set up her will the way she did. She believed that women are strongest when they're most vulnerable, and that's when they need the most support. Something in her tone made me pause. What exactly are we talking about here? Mrs. Patterson, I'd really prefer to discuss this in person, but given your circumstances, your great-aunt Cordelia left you her entire estate. Properties, investments, business holdings. The preliminary valuation is approximately $4.2 million. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. A nurse nearby looked over with concern as I stared at nothing, certain I was hallucinating from post-delivery exhaustion. Ma'am? Are you all right? The nurse picked up my phone. Hello? Yes, she's here. I think she's in shock. $4.2 million. It wasn't possible. People like me didn't inherit millions of dollars. People like me got thrown out while in labor and couldn't afford hospital bills. But 2 days later, sitting in Margaret Whitfield's downtown office with Lily sleeping in her car seat, I learned that sometimes life has a twisted sense of humor. Your great-aunt was quite remarkable, Margaret explained, sliding documents across the mahogany table. She started with nothing in 1952, built a small real estate empire, invested wisely, and never married. She said men were too expensive. I laughed despite myself, the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. She followed your life from a distance. Knew about your marriage, your husband's difficulties with employment. She wasn't impressed. David had been fired from 3 jobs in our 5-year marriage. Always someone else's fault. Always a boss who didn't appreciate his vision, or co-workers who were threatened by his intelligence. She also knew about his recent romantic complications. I looked up sharply. How could she possibly know that? Margaret smiled. Cordelia had her ways. She left specific instructions that if you ever found yourself in what she called circumstances requiring immediate financial independence, the inheritance was to be expedited. She knew he was cheating. She suspected he would eventually. She said men who don't work for what they have usually don't value what they're given. I stared at the papers outlining properties in 3 states, investment portfolios, and a trust fund that would ensure Lily's education was covered through graduate school. There's one more thing, Margaret said, pulling out a sealed envelope. She left you a personal note. Inside, in spidery handwriting, were just a few lines. Emma, darling, never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Build something beautiful. Love, Aunt Cordelia. The same words my grandmother used to say. Suddenly, I remembered her mentioning her clever sister Cordelia, who sent Christmas cards with $100 bills tucked inside. That night, in the small furnished apartment I'd rented with my newfound resources, I sat feeding Lily and thinking about David. By now, he'd probably discovered that his pregnant girlfriend was living in a house he could no longer afford, while his ex-wife had mysteriously disappeared into financial independence. I wondered how long it would take him to realize he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. I was about to find out. The law offices of Whitfield, Stern and Associates occupied an entire floor of the Meridian Tower, all glass and marble, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted. As I stepped off the elevator with Lily strapped to my chest in her carrier, I caught my reflection in the polished surfaces and barely recognized myself. 3 weeks of proper sleep, decent food, and the absence of David's constant criticism had already begun to transform me. My hair was clean and styled, my clothes actually fit properly, and for the first time in years I was standing up straight. Mrs. Patterson, Margaret Whitfield greeted me with a warm smile. You look wonderful. And this must be Miss Lily. Lily gurgled happily, completely unaware that she was about to become one of the wealthiest babies in the state. I still can't quite believe this is real, I admitted as Margaret led me into a conference room where 3 other people were waiting. Let me introduce you to your new team, Margaret said. This is James Chin, your financial advisor, Sarah Martinez, your real estate attorney, and Dr. Rebecca Thompson, who handles our estate planning. Not Sarah. A different Sarah. A competent, professional Sarah with kind eyes and a firm handshake. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before we dive into the numbers, Margaret said, settling into her chair, there's something else your great-aunt wanted you to know. Cordelia didn't just leave you money, Emma. She left you a business empire and she expected you to use it. James opened a thick folder. Let's start with the properties. You now own 12 residential properties across Oregon, Washington, and California. All currently rented, generating approximately $47,000 per month in income. My mouth fell open. Per month. That's just the real estate, Sarah Martinez added. You also own 3 commercial buildings, including a small office complex in Portland that's been looking for an anchor tenant. Dr. Thompson leaned forward. Your great-aunt was particularly proud of her investment portfolio. Technology stocks she bought in the 90s, blue-chip companies, some surprisingly savvy cryptocurrency investments she made in her 80s. The woman had an eye for innovation. But here's the most interesting part, Margaret said, sliding another document across the table. Cordelia started a small business consulting firm in 1987. She specialized in helping women entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. The company's been dormant since her death, but all the infrastructure is still there. Clients, contacts, reputation. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. You're saying I inherited a business? You inherited the foundation for whatever business you want to build, James clarified. Your great-aunt was very specific in her instructions. She said, and I quote, "Emma has spent too many years making herself smaller to fit into someone else's vision. It's time for her to build something of her own." Lily chose that moment to wake up and start fussing. As I lifted her from the carrier to feed her, I caught sight of myself in the conference room's glass wall. 3 weeks ago I'd been a woman with nothing. Now I was sitting in a boardroom being told I owned more assets than I could properly comprehend. "There's one more thing," Margaret said gently. "Your great-aunt left specific instructions about your situation. She anticipated that your husband might try to claim some of these assets in a divorce." My blood chilled. "Can he?" "Absolutely not," Sarah Martinez said firmly. "Every single asset was transferred to you personally before your marriage through inheritance. Oregon is a community property state, but inherited assets remain separate property unless they're specifically commingled." Which they weren't. "In fact," Dr. Thompson added with a slight smile, "if your husband attempts to claim any portion of your inheritance, we can countersue for fraudulent concealment of assets." I imagine he hasn't been entirely forthcoming about his own financial situation. They were right about that. David had always been secretive about money, claiming he was protecting me from stress. Now I realized he'd probably been hiding debt, failed investments, maybe even other expenses I didn't know about. "What do you recommend I do?" I asked, bouncing Lily gently as she settled back to sleep. "First," James said, "we set up proper financial structures. LLC for the business, trust funds for Lily's future, investment strategies that will grow your wealth rather than just preserve it. Second," Sarah Martinez continued, "we quietly purchased that office building in Portland and set up your new business headquarters. Nothing flashy but professional. Your great-aunt believed in leading by example." "And third," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling with something that looked suspiciously like mischief, "we wait. Men like your husband always reveal their true character when they think they have the upper hand. But they also make their biggest mistakes when they're desperate." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that end up in court records," Dr. Thompson said. "The kind that make excellent evidence in divorce proceedings." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. "David, we need to talk. This isn't working out the way I planned. Maybe we can work something out." I showed the message to Margaret, who raised an eyebrow. "That was faster than I expected. What do you think he wants?" "I think," Margaret said slowly, "your husband is discovering that his pregnant girlfriend is more expensive than he anticipated. And I think he's about to make his first really big mistake." I looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that her mother had just become a very dangerous woman to cross. "Let him come," I said quietly. "I'm ready." The knock on my apartment door came at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, just as I was settling Lily down for the night. Through the peephole I could see David standing in the hallway, flowers in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. He'd dressed up. The navy suit I'd bought him for our anniversary last year, the tie I'd picked out because it brought out his eyes. He looked terrible. His face was drawn, stubble suggesting he hadn't shaved in days, and there was something desperate in the way he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. This wasn't the confident man who'd thrown me out 6 weeks ago. This was someone who'd realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. I opened the door but left the chain latch in place. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. "Brooke, incredible. Being a mother suits you." I didn't respond, just stared at him through the gap. Can I come in? We need to talk. Talk here. His jaw tightened, the old David surfacing briefly, but then he forced a smile. I brought your favorites. Those roses from Mitchell's and that wine we had on our honeymoon. The wine I couldn't drink because I was pregnant with your child? He had the grace to look ashamed. Emma, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. From inside the apartment, Lily started crying. David's face lit up with what looked like genuine emotion. Is that her? Is that our daughter? My daughter. Emma, please. Let me see her. Let me explain. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain. David stepped inside, his eyes immediately going to the apartment. I watched his expression change as he took in the space. Larger than he'd expected, furnished with obvious quality, fresh flowers on the dining table, expensive baby gear scattered around. This is nice, he said, confusion creeping into his voice. How are you affording this place? I picked up Lily, who immediately settled in my arms. David stared at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. She's beautiful, he whispered. She looks just like you. What do you want, David? He set the flowers and wine on my coffee table, then ran his hands through his hair. Sarah and I, it's not working out. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He looked at me hopefully. Because I've been thinking about us. About what we had. About what we could have again. I almost laughed. You threw me out while I was in labor. I was confused, scared, making terrible decisions. But Emma, I realize now that you're the one I want to build a life with. You and Lily. And Sarah. David's expression darkened. Sarah turned out to be not what I expected. Meaning she's expensive. Demanding. She quit her job the day she moved in, said she needed to focus on preparing for the baby. But all she does is shop and complain and spend money we don't have. I bounced Lily gently, watching David pace around my living room. And the baby? What baby? I stared at him. Sarah's baby. The one you left me for. David stopped pacing. Emma, Sarah was never pregnant. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What did you say? She faked it. Fake positive tests, fake doctor's appointments, fake ultrasound photos she bought online. I found out 2 weeks ago when I insisted on going to a doctor's appointment with her. Turns out she'd been lying about everything. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. You left your pregnant wife for a woman who was faking a pregnancy. I know how it sounds. You destroyed our marriage for a lie. Emma, please just listen. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can make it right. We can be a family. The three of us. Lily chose that moment to grab my hair with her tiny fist, and I gently disentangled her fingers. Why would you think I'd want you back? Because we love each other. Because we have a daughter together. Because... He gestured around the apartment again. Because you clearly need help. I don't know how you're managing all this alone, but you shouldn't have to. There was the assumption that I was struggling, barely surviving, desperately in need of rescue. David couldn't conceive of a world where I might be thriving without him. What about Sarah? I'm kicking her out. Today. She can go back to her mother's place in Eugene. I'm done with her lies and her schemes and her constant demands for money I don't have. Money you don't have? David looked uncomfortable. The house. There have been some financial complications. The mortgage is behind, and with Sarah not working and spending everything I earn, it's been difficult. Difficult how? The bank sent a foreclosure notice last week. I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. You're losing the house. It's temporary. A misunderstanding. But Emma, if we got back together, pooled our resources, we could make it work. Pooled our resources. He still thought I had nothing. Still believed I was the same desperate woman he'd thrown out 6 weeks ago. David, I said slowly, where do you think I got the money for this apartment? For Lily's things? For the lawyer who's handling my divorce paperwork. His face went pale. What lawyer? I smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. The one who's very interested in your financial situation. What lawyer? David repeated, his voice climbing an octave. Emma, you don't need a lawyer. We can work this out ourselves like adults. I settled into my armchair, Lily content in my arms, and watched David pace around my living room like a caged animal. It was fascinating really seeing him this way. All those years he'd been the one in control, the one making decisions, the one holding the power. Now he was reduced to begging. Her name is Margaret Whitfield, I said casually. Very thorough woman. She's been quite interested in our financial arrangements during our marriage. David stopped pacing. What financial arrangements? Emma, you know I handled all the money. You never wanted to be involved with that stuff. Didn't I? Or did you just never give me the choice? That's not. Look, it doesn't matter now. What matters is us. Our family. He sat down on the edge of my couch, leaning forward earnestly. Emma, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes. But we can start over. Clean slate. With what money? You just told me you're losing the house. David's jaw tightened. That's temporary. I have prospects, job interviews lined up. And once we're back together, you won't need this expensive apartment. We can figure out something more reasonable. More reasonable? You know what I mean. Something within our means. Our means. He still assumed I was as financially dependent as when he'd thrown me out. Still believed I needed him to survive. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text message from an unknown number. Please don't answer that, David said quickly. This is important. We're talking about our future here. I glanced at the screen and had to bite back a smile. The message was from Margaret. Legal papers filed. Asset protection in place. Call when ready for Phase 2. Phase 2. We discussed this. The moment when David would inevitably come crawling back, thinking I was still the vulnerable woman he could manipulate. Emma, David continued, oblivious to my mental calculations, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But think about Lily. She deserves to have her father in her life. She deserves a stable home with both parents. Like the stable home you provided when you kicked us out during labor? I told you I was confused. Making bad decisions because I was overwhelmed. He reached across and tried to take my hand. But that's over now. Sarah's out of the picture. It's just us. I pulled my hand away. What happened to Sarah exactly? David's expression darkened. What do you mean? I mean, a woman doesn't fake a pregnancy for months without a reason. She must have been pretty desperate to go to those lengths. Sarah's a con artist, he said bitterly. I should have seen it sooner. She targeted me because she thought I had money. Did she? Did she what? Think you had money? Or did you tell her you had money? David shifted uncomfortably. That's not relevant. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like Sarah did exactly what you did to me. Found someone she thought could provide for her, then discovered the truth too late. It's completely different. Is it? You married me thinking I'd be your comfortable little housewife, content to clean and cook while you figured out your career. Sarah thought you were a successful man who could take care of her. You both made assumptions based on what you wanted to see. David stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to apologize here, trying to fix our marriage, and you're psychoanalyzing me like some amateur therapist. I'm not psychoanalyzing anyone. I'm just trying to understand why you think I'd want you back. Because we're married. Because we have a child together. Because. He gestured helplessly around the room. Because you need me. There was the heart of David's worldview. I needed him. I was incomplete without him. I was helpless, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. David, I said gently, what if I told you I don't need you anymore? His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger. Everyone needs someone, Emma. You can't raise a child alone. Can't I? Not without help. Not without support. And not without money. I stood up, shifting Lily to my shoulder. What makes you think I don't have money? Because you're a housewife. Because you haven't worked in 5 years. Because. He trailed off, studying my face. Emma, how are you paying for this place? I inherited some money. From who? Your parents didn't have anything when they died. From my great-aunt Cordelia. David frowned. You never mentioned a great-aunt Cordelia. You never asked about my family. You were too busy dismissing them as small-town people with small-town dreams. How much money are we talking about? I smiled. Enough. Enough for what? Enough to hire the best divorce lawyer in the state. Enough to ensure Lily and I never have to depend on anyone else. Enough to make sure you never have power over us again. The color drained from David's face. Emma, let's not do anything hasty. We can work this out. Compromise. I mean, if you have some inheritance money, that changes things. We could save the house, start fresh. Well, yes. We're still married. What's yours is ours, right? And there was the real reason for the flowers, the apology, the sudden interest in fatherhood. David didn't want me back because he loved me. He wanted access to whatever resources I'd found. Actually, David, I said, walking to the door, that's not how inheritance works. But you'll learn all about that soon enough. What do you mean? I opened the door. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. The job application arrived 3 weeks later, submitted through the online portal of my newly established consulting firm, Hartwell Business Solutions. I'd named it after my great-aunt, and with Margaret's help, I'd set up offices in the Portland building I now owned. Nothing flashy, just a simple suite with modern furniture, good lighting, and the kind of understated elegance that attracted serious clients. I was reviewing resumes for a personal assistant position when I saw it. Sarah Michelle Collins, 24, seeking full-time administrative support role. Previous experience as executive assistant at Patterson Construction Management. Patterson Construction. David's company. Or rather, David's former company. He'd been let go 2 weeks earlier when his inability to focus on work due to his personal problems had cost them a major client. I stared at the resume, hardly believing what I was seeing. Sarah Collins. My husband's former mistress, the woman who'd faked a pregnancy to steal him away, was applying to work for me. The universe, it seemed, had a delicious sense of irony. Her qualifications were mediocre at best. High school diploma, 6 months at community college before dropping out, a series of short-term administrative jobs with gaps in employment that she tried to cover with vague explanations about pursuing educational opportunities and caring for family members. But what made me smile was her cover letter. I am a dedicated and hard-working professional seeking a position where I can grow and contribute to a dynamic team. I have extensive experience in office management and client relations, and I pride myself on my ability to maintain confidentiality and handle sensitive situations with discretion. I am particularly interested in working for a female-owned business, as I believe women should support other women in achieving their professional goals. Women should support other women. Rich, coming from someone who'd knowingly destroyed another woman's marriage. I called Margaret immediately. You're not going to believe this, I said, faxing over the application. Margaret's laughter echoed through the phone. Oh, this is perfect. Absolutely perfect. She has no idea who you are. She knows my maiden name was Hartwell, but she's never seen me without my married name. Plus, I look completely different now. New haircut, professional clothes, makeup 20 pounds lighter. She probably wouldn't recognize me if we passed on the street. What are you thinking? I looked at Sarah's resume again. I'm thinking I want to hire her. Emma. Hear me out. She's been unemployed for a month since David kicked her out. She's probably desperate. And having her work for me means I can keep an eye on her, document everything she does, and... I paused, a delicious idea forming. And she might just confess to things that could be very useful in my divorce proceedings. It's risky. It's brilliant. She'll never suspect that her new boss is the woman whose life she helped destroy. And if she's as loose-lipped as David says she is, she might just give me everything I need to finish this. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You'd have to be very careful. No recording without consent, no entrapment, everything above board. Of course. I just want to observe. See what kind of person would fake a pregnancy to steal someone's husband. And if she recognizes you? Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But Margaret, this could be exactly what we need. David's been fighting the divorce, claiming he's a changed man who deserves another chance. But if Sarah starts talking about their relationship, about the lies she told, about why she really targeted him, it could blow his credibility completely. Exactly. I scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing, transforming myself into Emma Hartwell, successful businesswoman. Professional blazer, sleek updo, minimal but polished makeup. I practiced my voice, my posture, my expressions in the mirror until I was satisfied that this version of me bore little resemblance to the broken woman David had thrown out 2 months earlier. Tuesday morning, I sat in my office reviewing Sarah's application one more time when my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Hartwell, your 10 o'clock appointment is here. Send her in." The door opened and Sarah Collins walked into my office. She looked smaller than I remembered, younger, with an air of barely concealed desperation that she was trying to hide behind professional confidence. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup carefully applied, but I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she shook mine. "Miss Collins," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Thank you for coming in. Please have a seat. Thank you for considering my application, Ms. Hartwell. I'm very excited about the opportunity to work with your company." I studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition. Nothing. She saw exactly what I wanted her to see: a successful businesswoman who could offer her the stability she desperately needed. "Tell me about your most recent position," I said, opening her file. "Patterson Construction Management. What was your relationship with your supervisor there?" Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "It was professional. Very professional. I learned a lot about client relations and project management." "I see. And why did you leave?" "The company was going through some restructuring. Budget cuts, you know. Last hired, first fired." Interesting. She was already lying and we hadn't even gotten to the good parts yet. "I understand completely," I said sympathetically. "These days, job security is so important, especially for young women starting their careers." "Exactly," Sarah said, relaxing slightly. "I'm really looking for stability. A place where I can grow and contribute long-term." I smiled. "Well, Sarah, I think we might be able to help each other." Sarah's first day was a Tuesday in early November. I watched from my office window as she walked across the parking lot, clutching a coffee cup and checking her reflection in every car window she passed. She dressed carefully: a pencil skirt that was just a touch too tight, a blouse that showed more cleavage than was strictly professional, heels that clicked authoritatively on the pavement. She was trying so hard to project confidence, but I could see the nervousness in the way she kept adjusting her purse strap and checking her phone. "Good morning, Sarah," I said as she entered the main office. "Ready for your first day?" "Absolutely, Ms. Hartwell. I'm so grateful for this opportunity." I'd structured her role carefully. Personal assistant to the CEO, which meant she'd be working closely with me, handling my calendar, managing correspondence, and sitting in on client meetings. It was a position that required trust, discretion, and professionalism, qualities I was certain Sarah lacked. "Let me show you to your desk," I said, leading her to the workstation I'd set up just outside my office. Prime real estate with a clear view of my door and access to everything that happened in the company. "This is beautiful," Sarah breathed, running her hands over the sleek white desk and ergonomic chair. "Much nicer than my last office." "I believe in treating my employees well," I said. "Coffee, please. Just cream, no sugar." I'm watching my figure. As I prepared our coffee in the small kitchenette, I listened to Sarah settling in, opening drawers, adjusting her monitor, making little noises of appreciation. When I returned with our cups, she was examining the framed photos on her desk, stock images of happy people that came with the frames. "Family?" she asked. "Motivation," I replied. "Now let's go over your responsibilities." The first few hours were routine. Showing her the computer systems, explaining filing procedures, introducing her to our small staff. Sarah was a quick learner when she focused, but I noticed her attention wandering frequently. She kept checking her phone, glancing at her reflection in the computer screen, and finding excuses to walk past the office windows where she could be seen by people outside. "Miss Hartwell," she said during our lunch break, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you married?" I sipped my salad carefully. "Divorced. Recently, actually." "I'm so sorry. That must have been difficult." It was illuminating. Sarah leaned forward conspiratorially. "Can I tell you something? I just went through something similar. Well, not divorce, but a really bad breakup with a man I thought I was going to marry." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thank you. It's just, men can be so disappointing, you know? They promise you everything, make you believe you're building a future together, and then..." She shrugged, trying to look philosophical. "What happened?" "He was married," Sarah said, lowering her voice as if she were confessing a terrible secret. "I didn't know at first. He told me he was separated, that his wife didn't understand him, that they were just waiting for the right time to divorce." I kept my expression carefully neutral. "That's awful. How did you find out the truth?" "She showed up at my apartment," Sarah said, her eyes bright with the drama of it. 8 months pregnant, screaming about how I'd stolen her husband. It was like something out of a soap opera. 8 months pregnant. I'd been 6 months pregnant when David started his affair with Sarah, but I suppose the timeline sounded more dramatic her way. "What did you do?" "I ended it immediately, of course. I mean, I'm not a homewrecker. I would never knowingly get involved with a married man." Sarah's voice was earnest, her eyes wide with apparent sincerity. "It turns out he'd been lying to both of us." "Both of you?" "Well, he told me his wife was cold and distant, that their marriage was over in everything but name. But he told her that I was just a colleague, maybe a friend. He was playing us against each other." I took another bite of salad, marveling at Sarah's ability to rewrite history. In her version, she was the innocent victim, deceived by a manipulative man. David became the villain who lied to 2 trusting women. "That must have been very painful," I said. "It was devastating. I really thought he was the one, you know. I even..." She stopped herself as if she'd been about to reveal something too personal. "Even what?" Sarah bit her lip, then leaned closer. "This is embarrassing, but I actually thought I was pregnant. Missed periods, morning sickness, the whole thing. I was so excited to tell him, thinking it would finally give us the push we needed to be together officially." "And were you?" "No," Sarah said sadly. "False alarm. Stress-induced, according to the doctor. My body was so anxious about the whole situation that it created phantom pregnancy symptoms. Can you imagine? My mind wanted a baby so badly that it convinced my body it was having one." Phantom pregnancy symptoms. That was a new twist. In Sarah's revised history, she hadn't deliberately faked a pregnancy to trap David. She'd been the victim of her own desperate subconscious mind. "What happened when you told him?" "He was relieved," Sarah said bitterly. "Actually relieved. That's when I knew he never really loved me. If he had, he would have been disappointed too." I nodded sympathetically while mentally recording every word. Sarah wasn't just rewriting history. She was believing her own lies. This was going to be easier than I'd thought. 3 months into Sarah's employment, I had compiled what Margaret called a masterpiece of self-incrimination. Every conversation was a gift that kept giving. Each lunch break a new revelation about Sarah's creative relationship with the truth. Today's confession session began as they always did, with Sarah seeking my advice about her complicated romantic situation. "Miss Hartwell," she said, perching on the edge of my desk with a cup of coffee, "I need your wisdom about something." I looked up from my computer, projecting the same warm, maternal interest I'd cultivated over the past months. "Of course, Sarah. What's troubling you?" "It's about David. My ex. The married one I told you about. The one who lied to both you and his wife?" "Exactly. Well, he's been calling me. A lot. Begging me to take him back." I kept my expression carefully neutral. "Really? What's he saying?" Sarah sighed dramatically. "He says his wife left him and took their baby. Cleaned out their bank accounts and disappeared. He claims she inherited some money and is using it to destroy him in their divorce." "That sounds serious." "I know, right? But here's the thing." Sarah lowered her voice conspiratorially. I don't think he's telling me the whole truth. He keeps asking if I know any good lawyers, if I have any savings he could borrow, if I'd be willing to testify that his wife was an unfit mother. Testify about what? That's just it. I never met her. How could I testify about someone I've never even seen? Sarah laughed bitterly. He's so desperate he's not thinking straight. I leaned back in my chair. What do you think really happened? Honestly, I think his wife finally got smart. David's the kind of man who looks good on paper but falls apart under pressure. Great at making promises, terrible at keeping them. I bet she got tired of supporting his dreams while he chased other women. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Sarah describing David's character flaws with perfect accuracy while remaining completely oblivious to her own role in proving them. Have you considered taking him back? God, no, Sarah said quickly. I learned my lesson. Besides, I've met someone new. This was news. Oh. His name is Marcus. He's a real estate developer. Very successful, very generous. Sarah's eyes lit up. He's nothing like David. Marcus actually has money. That's wonderful, Sarah. How did you meet? Through a dating app. Well, technically through a sugar daddy website, but don't judge me. Sarah laughed. I was honest about what I was looking for: financial stability, someone who could take care of me properly. No games, no lies, no married men. A sugar daddy website. I made a mental note to have Margaret's investigator look into that. And he's legitimate? Oh yes. He's taken me to the most amazing restaurants, bought me jewelry, even paid off my credit card debt. $23,000 just like that. Sarah snapped her fingers. He says he loves taking care of beautiful women who appreciate the finer things in life. $23,000 in debt. That explained the desperation I'd sensed during her interview. That's very generous of him. I know, right? And he's talking about setting me up in a nice apartment, maybe even buying me a car. He says I remind him of his ex-wife when she was younger. His ex-wife. They divorced last year. Apparently she got boring after their kids grew up. Started wanting to find herself and pursue her own interests instead of focusing on him. Sarah rolled her eyes. Can you imagine? The man gives you everything and you throw it away because you want to be independent. I could imagine it perfectly. Another woman who discovered that being a rich man's accessory wasn't the fairy tale it appeared to be. Sarah, I said carefully, don't you ever want independence? Your own career, your own success. She looked at me like I'd suggested she grow a second head. Why would I want to struggle when I don't have to? Look, Miss Hartwell, I respect what you've built here, I really do. But working this hard, dealing with all this stress, it's not for me. I'd rather focus on making someone happy and let them handle the difficult stuff. And if something happens to Marcus, if he decides he wants someone newer, younger, then I'll find someone else, Sarah said matter-of-factly. I'm good at that. I know what men want and I know how to give it to them. It's like a skill. What if you can't find someone else? Sarah's confidence flickered for just a moment. That won't happen. I mean, it can't happen. I don't have any other options. There was the truth beneath all of Sarah's bravado. She wasn't choosing this lifestyle because she loved it. She was trapped in it because she'd never developed any real skills or independence. She was terrified of being alone, of having to support herself, of discovering she might not be as irresistible as she believed. Sarah, I said gently, what would you do if you had to start over? If you had to build a life completely on your own? Her face went pale. I don't know. I've never had to think about that. Maybe you should. She laughed nervously. You're scaring me, Ms. Hartwell. Why would I need to start over? Everything's going perfectly with Marcus. I smiled. I'm sure it is. I just think it's important for women to have backup plans. Like you did with your divorce? Exactly like that. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've always wondered, how did you manage to leave your husband so cleanly? Most women end up with nothing. I met her eyes directly. I had help from someone who taught me that the strongest revenge is living well. That's beautiful. Who taught you that? Someone very wise, I said, thinking of my great-aunt Cordelia. Someone who understood that knowledge is power, and the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them defeat themselves. Sarah smiled, completely missing the warning in my words. I love that. Maybe someday I'll be as strong as you. Maybe you will, I agreed. But first you'll need to learn the truth about yourself. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Sarah jumped up to answer it, and I watched her transform back into the efficient assistant she pretended to be. Soon, very soon, all the pieces would fall into place.